Our top focus this hour. After 3 years, the United States has lifted COVID restrictions known as Title 42. The curbs allowed U.S. agents at the Mexico border to turn away migrants before they made a claim for asylum. New restrictions have now come into force. Anyone who illegally enters the United States can be expelled, facing a lengthy ban on coming back and possible criminal charges as well. These are the scenes at the US-Mexico border after lifting of Title 42. Dozens of police cars lined up in Texas. This area is near the entrance of the international bridge that crosses into Mexico. The security personnel are deployed to deter mass migrant arrivals. The new regulations require asylum seekers and other migrants to request entry from outside the United States. How that will play out on the ground remains unclear. For now, the Secretary of U.S. Homeland Security has said, I am quoting here, our borders are not open. At the frontier, some migrants made last-minute attempts to beat the deadline crossing the Rio Grande River near Brownsville, hoping they might be released after turning themselves into border patrol. Many migrants come from Mexico and 3 Central American countries, Guatemala, El Salvador and Honduras. In recent years, though, there has been a jump in arrivals from Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Cuba and Haiti. Meanwhile, Mexican president called on the United States to resolve its differences with Venezuela and Cuba to reduce flow of undocumented migrants. President Lopez Obrador said he told Biden that the root cause of migration in Latin America and the Caribbean must be addressed. Now, the U.S. has placed new restrictions to try to stop migrants from crossing illegally. The Biden administration has warned migrants will be removed from the U.S. southern border if they have not followed the new procedures. Let's just take a look at Title 42, the rule no longer applicable, and how the U.S. immigration policies are now changing. First up, Title 42, of course, as I mentioned, COVID border policy that was used to expel migrants. Now, President Joe Biden's administration has lifted Title 42. It was a strict protocol that was implemented by former President Donald Trump. Title 42, it denied entry to migrants, expelled asylum seekers based on the COVID pandemic emergency. That was the reason that was cited. Then next up, it denied many migrants even the chance to seek asylum. Title 42 allowed border agents to rapidly turn back many migrants to Mexico without a chance to ask for asylum. President Joe Biden, a Democrat, took over office in 2021, vowing to reverse Trump's approach here. However, he kept Title 42 in place for a little while longer. Now, since its inception, migrants have been expelled more than 2.7 million times under Title 42. However, this total also includes repeat crossers, and Mexico has generally only accepted certain nationalities. The other point here is that U.S. immigration processing now reverts to a pre-existing system. That is Title 8, as you can see. It's a pre-existing system, making future legal residency impossible. Moving on now, U.S. immigration process with this new and much more stringent rules for asylum will also be now implemented under Title 8. Now, a point that I made earlier about residency being impossible, that's because Title 8, it essentially criminalizes illegal border crossings. So don't get confused there. Title 8, it criminalizes illegal border crossings, making future legal residency impossible here. Under the U.S. and international law, anyone who comes to the United States can ask for asylum. Now, the new rules can also deny asylum to almost all illegal border crossers. Under, as I mentioned, the international law, anyone who does come to the United States can ask for asylum. Now, people, they also must apply through Customs and Border Patrol apps here. The Biden administration is now trying to turn away anyone seeking asylum who didn't first seek protection in a country that they've traveled through or first applied online. Now, alternatively, people can also apply for asylum in nations that they pass through. It's not clear whether the new norms will hold up. A lawsuit is expected as well. Processing centers are also soon to be set up. U.S. officials plan to open about 100 regional migration hubs across the Western Hemisphere where people can seek replacement in another country, including Canada and Spain. There will be hubs in Colombia, Guatemala, but it's not clear when they will be up and running. It's also So that remains to be seen as well. Now, to understand this better, for more on this, we have with us Anne-Louisa Nolsolov, who is a multimedia journalist and an expert on migrant struggles. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. Yes, there's definitely a crisis at the border, but that is a crisis that has been going on for the past few years since Title 42 was implemented. I myself went and reported at the camps that had been set up on the border. Many of the cities where the migrants were waiting for their asylum hearings in Mexico are some of the most dangerous cities in the country, and where the migrants were often subject to kidnappings, where the camps themselves were being run by criminal groups in cahoots with Mexican migration authorities. And so now it's unclear what will happen if those camps will still...
Right, absolutely. In fact, I was just going to come to this. If you could just tell us about the situation at the border at this point, do you think there are effective measures in place to deal with an anticipated influx of migrants?
No, there is definitely neither on the Mexican side nor on the U.S. side nor anywhere else in the U.S. Are either country ready to deal with the influx of migrants. Mexico does not have the infrastructure. All of the shelters at every border city are full. This is also the case of organizations that are helping on the U.S. side of the border. And this is also where we have seen states like Texas, where they are sending the migrants that have entered, once they are in some kind of migration proceeding, that they are sending them on buses to states up in the north. And also, many migrants, when the new rules will make them apply first for asylum in a country that they pass through. For many migrants, they don't feel safe living in Mexico, that is not an option for them. And also, their support network is in the United States. So that is why they do not necessarily want to apply for asylum in Mexico. But now with the new rules that will be implemented, they will be required to apply for asylum in Mexico before being able to apply for asylum in the United States.
Right. Absolutely. Raise a very interesting point there. What other measures would you say in light of that are needed to effectively deal with migrant crossings and also ensure better help for those stuck at the borders?
Right. Well, I think that we have a very clear example of what not to do. Just a month ago, over 40 migrants died in a shelter, not in a shelter, in migrant detention center, which the government called a shelter, but really it was more a jail, where the migrants had been rounded up in Ciudad Juarez. They were detained by migration authorities, and they were in this jail cell. They had been denied water, and they started burning mattresses in protest. And the detention officers, instead of responding to their protest, they walked away, and the migrants died, incinerated within this jail. Since then, the head of Mexican migration authorities has been let go and is under investigation. But this is a clear example of how Mexico is not ready to deal with an influx of migrants at the border. And as we have repeatedly seen in the United States, when there was an influx a few years ago of unaccompanied minors, they were held in really harsh conditions, something that was called the ice box in detention centers on the southern border. That is not something we're hearing right now, but it's just another example of how the U.S. is also not ready to deal with an influx. And they are saying that they will set up these centers that you mentioned, where people can apply from their home countries, but there is no timeline of when that is happening. And then they also have this new application for telephones, for smartphones, where migrants can apply, but that is means that they need to have a functioning smartphone and good internet, and also be internet savvy to apply through that. And then people have said that often the site itself is crashing, so that's also not a very good alternative for these migrants to apply for asylum.
Now, another point here, and just for more clarity, Mexican President Lopez Obrador said that he told Biden that the root causes here of migration in Latin America and Caribbean must be addressed. Could you take us through these apparent root causes?
Yes, the root causes are largely stemming from poverty that leads to violence, and that in the countries, both in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, many people flee when they receive a threat that if they don't join a gang, they will be murdered, or if their business won't pay what's called the rent, which means like an extortion fee, they will also be killed. Also, climate change has increased migration over the past few years, where rural farmers can no longer make a living when there's a drought or there's a storm, and they also migrate. That's something that is not studied enough, but it has definitely been documented that climate change has contributed to migration up north. And then also, of course, the COVID pandemic also led to increased severe poverty and an economic crisis, which has also led to further migration. Then on top of it, we have countries like Haiti, where there has been a lot of migration since the earthquake over 10 years ago, and then repeated economic crisis, health crisis, and today there's a lot of violence since Haiti's president was murdered.
All right. Ms. Ana Luisa Nolslov, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast with your perspective on this. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.